price of honor. The past. The floating platform, a mile across, had once been a marvel of latticework, bone, and glass, wrought so finely it cast no shadow on the city below. It drifted in stately orbit about the central spire, long vines cascading down from its underside, nearly brushing the heads of the citizens in their prime. Children had leapt to catch the ivy strands as they swayed in the breeze, laughter bright beneath the endless sky. On the seafront, sleek pleasure craft darted in and out of the many jetties. The bustle of traders, musicians, and visitors gave the quarter a low hum of life. Tall bone crystal towers stretched skyward, oval windows catching the light of the twin suns. Broad sails had once unfurled to shade wide balconies where Eldari nobles sat in indolence, sipping nectar beneath the warm summer glow. Far off, the inner city's spires rose like pale trees, a forest of glass and bone, joined by myriad bridges that arched high across the air. Malcheron had remembered it with a pang of wonder, the warmth of the sun across his face. Behind him, 5 of his brothers had gazed at the Xeno's architecture in equal parts awe and distaste. Eldari had walked past them without fear, some pausing to offer him the gesture of goodwill, hands crossed at the wrists. He had returned the courtesy with a smile. The air had smelled of flowers and sea salt, and the distant sound of harps and lutes had drifted on the wind. Consul, the praetor's voice cut through. Malcheron blinked. The sun was gone. The sea lay stagnant, heavy with the reek of rotting kelp and ozone. The market stalls had long since rotted away, the citizens with them. A single pleasure craft's prow still jutted from the waves, its hull ruptured and armored in barnacles. Far out across the ocean, the floating platform was no longer a marvel but a corpse, its weight driven down into the sea like a spear. From its broken ribs hung tattered vines, now brown and mold-encrusted, swaying with the tide. Behind him the 5 librarians stirred, pale in the half-light. "It is near," one murmured, voice rasping as though the air itself resisted speech. The praetor raised a gauntleted hand in battle sign. The iron hands fanned out, boots grinding shards of crystal and bone to dust beneath them. Up ahead, Captain Erastes Carrion had taken position atop the remains of a balcony. The sailcloth awning that once shaded it flapped in tatters, rain dripping down bone walls stained green with moss and lichens. The captain held an oculus scanner, the cracked lenses catching ghost light, and signaled the all-clear across the ruined expanse of the dead Eldari city. Erastes handed the oculus to Tharn, who lifted it to his helm's lenses. He swept the skyline. Bone towers shattered, some toppled into their neighbors. The bridges that once spanned them half collapsed into nothing. "What in the Emperor's name happened here?" Tharn muttered. Erastes rubbed his jaw with a gauntlet. "All Eldari worlds are like this. We just don't see it. By the time an Astartes force is deployed, the war has already reduced the ruins to dust." He checked his chronometer. The shipmaster above had marked it near to midday, yet the sun barely struggled to half its climb through a shroud of storm clouds. "I think this world is in its autumn. If we were on Medusa, the dust storms would already be gathering. I wonder," his voice trailed for a moment, "what it looked like here in summer." Tharn gave him a sidelong glance. "You feeling well, Carrion? That almost sounded poetic." Erastes replaced his helm. The Vox filter turned his reply to iron. "Maybe this planet gets to me." He kept low against the wall's ragged edge, discipline drilled too deep to risk a silhouette, even in a dead world. Below, the shuttle still waited on the concourse. Around it stood Athenorod's men, their cataphractii plate dark against the pale stone. For a moment, Erastes felt a weight in his chest. The formation looked too much like an honor guard for a broken wolf. He turned his gaze out to the water. A ruined wharf jutted into the waves, and beyond it a bone crystal temple rose half-submerged, a broken bridge leading toward its gate. A sniper team held position there. If the whelp tried anything, every angle was covered. He looked back to the praetor. The man stood alone, more starkly so, without Cadon at his side. Malcheron, the consul, lingered close, but the bond was not the same. Erastes opened the squad vox. "My lord praetor, the area is secure." From his vantage, he saw the praetor give a curt reply in battle sign. "Bring the cargo." Malcheron had not heard the transmission, nor seen the sign. Yet the order rippled through his mind all the same. Through the warp, through the faint threads of thought both commander and captain believed hidden. He smiled faintly. Their codes, their hand signals, their little machines, all blind fumbling. To a librarian, they were children walking unknowing through a universe of wonders. Athanorod emerged from the shuttle's shadow, his bulk encased in cataphractii plate the color of scorched iron, its overlapping slabs pitted and battle-scored from a dozen campaigns. Around him strode his chosen guard, 6 Terminators whose sheer mass made the cracked concourse shudder with each step. Their visors glowed like furnace slits, unblinking, fixed upon the figure they escorted. Adorati Lior was no longer a warrior, though once he had been Luna Wolf and librarian, bright with purpose in a past that now seemed impossibly distant. His warplate was gone, stripped from him piece by piece until only scarred flesh and shame remained. Iron plates had been driven crudely over his eyes with rivets and nails, sealing away both sight and psychic vision. A pariah brand, a living blank, had been stitched into his back, its null field choking the warp to silence. He walked with a staff of plain wood, tapping the ground before each step. His lips were sewn tight, black wire glistening with dried blood where they tugged against raw flesh. No sound could escape him, and yet he carried himself with strange dignity, shoulders square, spine unbowed, every inch the legionary he had once been. The Terminators guarded him with obvious unease. Even sealed in cataphractia, their movements betrayed distrust. Bolters never lowered, fists clenched tight around hafts of chain axes or hammers. The Null's presence made them sick in their souls. Still, they obeyed, for Athanorod's will was iron. The consul Malchiron's voice broke the silence as he moved alongside the praetor. "We are almost at our journey's end, brother. You must be glad of it." His eyes flicked across the Iron Hands ranks spreading through the ruins, their bolters ever watchful. "If only they knew why we were here, on Valmir, what the Lyrathiel device did." He gave a low laugh. "Your men would be proud of their service. They might even respect you more." The praetor's helm turned slightly. His voice, flat through the vox grill, carried no mirth. "We should have told them." Malchiron laughed outright, the sound harsh against the ruined silence. "Told them? They would have killed us the moment we did." He strode forward without waiting for reply, eyes fixed on the vast dome rising in the distance. Its cracked shell loomed through the mist, half sunken, like the skull of some dead god. His librarians followed in his wake, robes whispering across the stone. The praetor lingered a moment, watching him go. "They would have been right to," he murmured beneath his breath, unheard by any save himself. Then he raised a fist and gave the signal. Athanorod and his cataphracti advanced, their prisoner between them. The sound of their tread echoed down the desolate avenue, iron and shame marching toward the domed structure that waited like a tomb. The brig of the Lament of Desire was little more than a platform built into the cliff face of a vast engine chamber, where heat baffles vented roaring gouts of steam into the abyss below. Chains rattled in the gloom, cutting through the endless clank and drone of machinery. Centurion Corlin sat slumped against the wall, one leg replaced with a badly fitted servitor limb that clicked with each movement. Beside him was brother Nyros, coughing raggedly, one arm bound in rough bandages. Both were Luna wolves, and both knew what fate awaited them. Adorati Lior had been taken by an Iron Hand squad only hours before. They had heard his chains dragged away, and the silence that followed had been damning. Their turn would come soon, execution, quiet and unrecorded, to erase the embarrassment of prisoners. A heavy clank shook the deck. The massive door ground open, letting in a wedge of harsh light. "This is it," Corlin muttered. Nyros rose, coughing into his palm, and stood ready to face his end. Half of him hoped it would be Caden who came, one of the few Iron Hands he had ever spoken to during the crusade. That would have been fitting, but the figures that entered were not Iron Hands. 5 warriors in blue plate marched across the threshold, their armor chased with gold, a sergeant's plume crowning one helm. Corlin stared. "By the throne," Nyros wheezed out a laugh, half choked on his cough. "Oh, now that does it. The universe truly does enjoy its jokes. To die at the hands of Iron Hands would be bad enough, servitors in armor, but Ultramarines, one of Gilliman's perfumed sons?" He laughed again, hacking until his knees bent. "Gods give me strength." The newcomers lowered a gantry across the chasm and advanced, bolters leveled. My hands are up, Nyros croaked, raising his single hand. Then grinning, my hand is up. The sergeant came forward, plume catching the lamplight. He removed his helm, revealing a pallid face beneath, and tucked it under his arm. His smile was jagged. Be still, brother. We are here to rescue you. Nyros coughed, chuckling through the spasm. I know the 13th Legion prides itself on humor, but that is not funny. The man gave a small bow. Nadrek. Corlin narrowed his eyes. He had heard that cadence before, the lilt beneath the words. That's no Ultramar accent. That's Nostraman. Another warrior stepped forward, setting aside his bolter and drawing a cutting torch. He ignited the flame with a hiss. Stole the plate, he said matter-of-factly. We are Night Lords. Sparks showered as he began slicing through the chains. Talakor worked in silence while Nadrek leaned in closer. We have tracked the Iron Hands fleet for weeks. We boarded in the guise of the 13th. Our ship, the Silent Lament, shadows the fleet even now. Our brothers wait below on the planet. We will need your aid. You will create a distraction. We will seize the bridge. And then, his grin widened, we vent the ship. A prize for the War Master. Nyros, once freed, adjusted the ragged binding on his stump and clapped a mailed arm around Nadrek's shoulders. Well met, brother. I'll never let a bad word be said about the Night Lords again. Nyros then embraced each of his rescuers with a joyful word. Talakor shoved him off irritably. We are not safe yet. Save your levity. This will take precision. Nyros bent double in a coughing fit that shook his whole frame. This plan is good, he rasped, still laughing through the pain. Corlin stood silent until Talakor's torch cut the last of his chains. He flexed his arms, then looked down grimly. An ambitious plan. It is, Nadrek said, grinning like a skull. Corlin rubbed his jaw. But it wasn't our plan at all. Before the Night Lords could react, Nadrek doubled over again, this time spitting out not phlegm, but a small transmitter from his mouth. He flicked the switch. Hidden charges planted on each Night Lord's power pack flared with a shriek of blue light. The 5 warriors convulsed, armor locking rigid, sparks crackling. 3 toppled from the gantry, their screams lost to the abyss. Nadrek lay prone, armor inert, eyes wide with horror. What? Corlin knelt over him, pulling the Volk blade from his belt. Not our plan. Are you deaf as well as a fool? He didn't wait for a reply. The blade ended the matter. Talakor, his armor dead, dragged himself face down along the gantry, straining every muscle to move the dead weight. His hand clawed towards his bolter. Nyros followed, unhurried, and crouched beside him. For your information, he said conversationally, the Luna Wolves train to move even when the machine fails. Talakor's arm could not lift his weapon. His pauldron weighed him down. Nyros sighed, shook his head, and slid the knife into the gap of his gorget. See what happens, he whispered, when you rely on gadgets. Some time later, the sound of armored boots echoed from the lower accessway. 2 warriors emerged into the half-light, their ceramite plates bearing the cobalt and gold of the 13th. One bore a tall command plume, helm polished to a mirror sheen. The other moved with a faint limp that had not been present before. The Iron Hands serfs stationed in the hall scarcely looked up. To them, the blue armor of the Ultramarines meant legitimacy, authority, warriors of Guilliman walking among Ferris's sons. Their eyes slid back to their tasks, tending cogitators, polishing bolter magazines, or reciting machine prayers in monotone. The newcomers passed unchallenged, the plume brushing the gloom like a banner. The limp went unremarked. No suspicion flickered across the serf's blank features. No sign betrayed that anything was amiss. In the heart of the lament of desire, deception walked openly, clothed in trust, bought by stolen colors. Orestes kept to the flank, his squad moving like wraiths through the upper tiers of shattered towers. They darted from ruin to ruin, traversing the bone-spun bridges that linked the structures, always above and to the side of the Praetor's landing party. Their black plate was mottled with dust and decay, turning the Iron Hands into shadows within shadows. Orestes took quiet pride in that. He was no Raven Guard, nor had his warriors trained as the 19th did, but the 7th had their own creed. They were a breaching company, famed across countless crusade campaigns for cracking Xenos citadels and hunting their defenders through the rubble. Every warrior of the 7th had been drilled in silent advance, in knife-thrust warfare, and in the patient art of closing with the enemy unseen. The captain landed in silence upon the tiles of an open chamber. Long ago it had borne a mosaic, but mold and filth had erased its meaning. His suspensor-rigged boots cushioned the impact, though even so the ancient tiles cracked under the mass of his warplate. Erastus crossed quickly to a balcony where a headless statue loomed, its faceless vigil over the thoroughfare below. He leaned on the stone lip and watched the praetor's party move carefully through the street's ruins. Tharn dropped beside him, landing in a crouch, his melta gun cradled low. He scanned the dome on the horizon. "I think they're heading for that," he muttered. "Madrax has gone ahead. He'll set the perimeter." Erastus' helm tilted, the cold optics narrowing. Then whatever the consul seeks lies within. His gaze swept the broken skyline. "Although I'd wager there is nothing left of value here. Scavengers strip such places within days, not decades." Tharn's attention lingered on the prisoner shuffled between the cataphracti, his stick tapping hollowly against the flagstones. The Terminator's bolters were trained not outward, but on him. "So why the wolf?" Tharn asked. "Why drag a warp tongue all this way?" Erastes spat dryly, the sound harsh within his helm. "Only the Emperor knows, but I wager he'll never see Medusa again." Tharn raised his melta, its muzzle settling upon Adherati Lior's bent form. "Permission for an accidental misfire, Lord," he asked cheerfully. Erastes barked a low laugh. "Don't tempt me, Tharn. Don't tempt me." The two warriors chuckled darkly and moved on, their squad following with silent discipline. They leapt a half-collapsed bridge and vanished into the next ruin. Dust sifted down into the street, settling in their wake. When the air stilled, another figure stepped into the aperture they had abandoned. Black was not the only color that blended with shadow. Blue was better. Talon Centurion Raskarn of the 8th Legion leaned into the broken light, the curved beak of his helm catching the dim glow. His smile was audible in the vox. "They've a wolf in chains," he murmured, "and a brace of psychers besides." Behind his lenses, his eyes never wavered. The null braces affixed to his warrior's helm smothered their presence from the warp, cloaking them from any librarian's senses. The Night Lords moved as one, shadows peeling from the walls of the ruin, their cobalt plate shifting like liquid dusk. Raskarn turned, and with him, the hunt followed the hunters. The landing party pressed on through the shattered street. Bone arches sagged overhead, their spines cracked with age, while crystal walkways lay splintered across the flagstones. Cataphracti armor clanked at the rear, shepherding Adorati Leor with bolters aimed inward, their massive frames looming over his frail, blinded form. Consul Malchiron walked beside the praetor, his eyes unfocused. The ruins blurred before him, and once again the vision came. The street was not dead but alive, its steps thronged with Eldari in flowing silks, their voices lilting in the air like music. Perfume and incense drifted across the breeze. Merchants carried wares of crystal and bone, and children darted between the feet of guardians clad in armor that shimmered like polished jade. Ahead, the grand dome rose like a pearl set upon the horizon, its steps alive with pilgrims ascending to its gates. Within, light dazzled him. The vast interior was a gallery of memory. Hololithic projectors shimmered across the chamber, casting perfect images of battles long gone. Burning craft worlds defending themselves against nameless horrors, duels of champions upon alien planes, fleets of elegant vessels locked in void war against nameless foes. The roof stretched above in impossible splendor, painted with the star chart of the Eldari Empire. Constellations glittered with the faces of their great leaders, immortalized in radiant color, their eyes gazing down like gods. He blinked. The images guttered and died. The dome lay in ruin. Its roof was torn with ragged holes, through which rain poured in cold sheets. The hololith plinths were shattered, their frames broken and covered with moss. Fallen leaves carpeted the floor in sodden drifts. The once proud fresco of stars had collapsed in fragments, dripping mildew and streaked with cracks. Malchiron approached one of the crystal hololith stands, its glass cracked but still faintly etched with alien script. He crouched, running a gauntleted hand across the inscription beneath the leaves. Faded but clear, the words formed themselves in his mind's eye. Lyrithil. He spoke it softly, tasting the syllables. The Song of Binding. Behind him, the praetor waited in silence. The cataphractii stood watch over their prisoner, their armor looming like executioner's blocks in the half-light. For a moment, only the sound of the rain filled the silence of the dead city. Consul Malcheron pressed on through the ruins until the great white tree came into view at the heart of the dome. It rose like a pillar of bone, its surface studded with dull gems and fractured crystals. The thing shimmered faintly with residual light, and as he drew near, whispers stirred in the air. Voices, chants, fragments of songs, the half-remembered echoes of poetry long since lost. Malcheron spread his arms wide, a faint smile on his lips. "Lirathiel," he said softly, as if naming a masterpiece. "The Song of Binding." The praetor came up beside him, helm tilted. "Is that supposed to mean something? What is a Song of Binding?" Around them, the librarians of the consul's retinue fanned out, tracing the runes on the bone roots and examining the embedded stones with hungry fascination. Malcheron plucked one of the gems loose, turning it in his hand. When the Eldari fell, they were consumed by a newborn warp entity, Slaanesh, a god, a daemon, however you name it, born of their decadence, their excess. That is why their spawn look as they do. The praetor gave a curt nod, holding one of the crystals between his gauntlets. The Legion has known of these things since the early Crusade. They are spirit stones, containing a psalm code of sorts, a ghost of machine spirit, perhaps some crude equivalent to an STC fragment. The Mechanicum has never been able to interface with them. That is what the Mechanicus believes. Malcheron countered, shaking his head, but the Officium Secretorum, our own intelligence seers, have long suspected something far deeper. His voice lowered, conspiratorial. The Eldari speak in metaphors, but the Song of Binding is not a riddle. It is exactly what it says. It is a device for binding the soul, transferring it into a vessel. The praetor stared down at the gem in his hand, realization dawning. His voice faltered. "You mean these stones are not code or data stores? They are people, a soul preserved." Malcheron's smile widened, almost indulgent. "Precisely. When an Eldari dies to save themselves from Slaanesh, they transfer their soul into a stone. This," he gestured up at the white bone tree, "is no mere archive. It is a reliquary of the dead." The praetor lifted his gaze to the crystalline branches above, the countless stones glinting dully in the half-light. "So this is a library of Eldari souls." Malcheron laughed. "An interesting way of putting it, but apt enough. This is an early version, primitive compared to what later emerged on the craft worlds. But here on Valmir, they had already begun their work. Some among them foresaw what was coming. And this," he tapped the trunk, "was their answer." The praetor stood in silence, the voices of the stones whispering at the edge of his perception. At last he turned, his expression hard. "This is all very good, Consul. A historical mystery solved that we never knew we were looking for. But tell me, how does this matter to our war? To the rebellion? The Iron Thane claimed that Lirathiel was a weapon, one that could defeat the warp spawn aiding Horus. How? How does a tree of dead souls achieve that?" Athenorod's cataphractii stepped back, their bulk shifting away from the captive as Consul Malcheron raised a hand. The Luna Wolf was brought forward. Adorati Leor advanced with a measured pace, each step deliberate despite his grotesque mutilations. Iron plates had been nailed over his eyes, stitchings sealing his mouth, a null implant writhing at his spine like a parasite. Yet he stood with dignity, his head lifted as if defying the ruin of his body. Malcheron's lip curled. "Behold how the mighty servants of Horus are brought low." The other librarians gathered close, circling the prisoner like carrion birds. High above, upon the shattered dome, Erastes watched through fractured stonework. He gave silent battle sign to Tharn, "Keep your Melta on the wolf." Whatever the consul was attempting, Erastes distrusted it utterly. His praetor, he thought grimly, was misjudging the matter. Malcheron turned sharply to Athenorod. "Kill the abomination." The Terminator looked to the praetor. "These are my men," the praetor said flatly, his voice iron within the vox. Malcheron's eyes narrowed. "This is my expedition." The praetor gave the slightest nod. Athenorod raised his axe. Adhorati Leor did not flinch. Even blinded, bound, and mutilated, he radiated an aura of honor. He had accepted his fate. The axe fell. His body dropped to the dusty floor, headless. A second blow split the null-spine parasite, silencing its twitching carcass. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, in Malchiron's palm, a spirit stone that had lain dull and lifeless began to glow, light blooming within it like a captured sun. Ruby brilliance pulsed from its depths. The librarians gasped. Malchiron laughed aloud, holding the stone aloft. "Behold, the first human-soul interface!" The praetor remained unmoving, helm tilted. All he saw was a corpse, a stone, and perhaps a consul sliding into madness. He knew more of this mission than most, but even so, he had believed the Iron Thane's promise of a device to nullify the warp, a weapon against chaos. This was something else entirely. A prison for the soul, requiring the death of the subject. He had thought such a thing might serve as a last resort for mortally wounded warriors, like a dreadnought's sarcophagus. But this was desecration. So how does this help? His tone was cautious, but the disgust beneath it was plain. Suppose the Luna Wolf's soul, or its memory imprint, is trapped in that crystal. So what? We have no machines to interface with it. Malchiron turned the stone over in his palm, his eyes blazing with psychic light. Are the applications not obvious? You iron hands already embrace the machine, already deny the weakness of flesh. Here is the perfection of that creed, to become a living circuit, a machine mind freed of mortal frailty. Is this not the Mechanicum's dream since its birth? The praetor stepped back, eyes roving the bone tree, the cabal of librarians, the grinning consul. His gut twisted in revulsion. Malchiron lifted the stone high, his voice exultant. For application? Simple. Bone-wrought infinity circuits, implanted into Astartes' armor, flesh paired to what is necessary, plate joined with crystal, each soul interfaced, linked, an army of wraiths, a company reborn as eternal machine warriors, immune to the warp, immortal, unkillable. Be proud, Praetor. This is the Emperor's dream. This is the future of our species. His laughter echoed beneath the broken dome, mingling with the whispered voices of the stones in the bone tree above. The iron hands shifted uneasily, bolters half raised. Comprehension dawned in their eyes, a mix of dread and disbelief. Athenorod's grip tightened on his axe as he looked to the praetor. "You are insane," the praetor said coldly, his helm angled toward Malchiron. Even the War Master would not stoop to such depravity. Malchiron's smile was thin. "Do not worry, praetor. You will be given a suitable stone to contain your ego." The praetor drew his pistol, but the consul flicked a finger. Bone splinters tore free from the tree with a shriek, shards and a dull stone slamming into the praetor like a storm of demonic darts. They sank into his armor, burning through the ceramite. A psychic blast hurled him backwards into a hololith stand, the crystal shattering around him. Athanorod charged, axe raised, but a wave of force swept him aside, crashing him into his own men. From behind a column, Madrax burst forth with 3 of his assault brethren, jump packs flaring. Malchiron turned, contempt in his eyes. With a gesture, their engines screamed and died, and all 3 tumbled helplessly. He stepped to Madrax as the lieutenant clawed for his chainsword. "You, brother Madrax," Malchiron said with mockery, "can be the first of the augmented." His staff punched through Madrax's chest plate. With one motion, he tore a branch from the bone tree and rammed it into the dying warrior's torso. A fresh stone glowed in Malchiron's palm, which he forced into the rent in the armor. He pressed his hand over the wound, warp energy twisting time itself. Bone laced into ceramite and flesh, binding them as one. The stone flared. Madrax jerked upright, lenses glowing with eerie inner fire. Malchiron laughed, his voice echoing across the chamber. "Behold, the first Iron Wraith!" The Iron Hands stood in shock, horror writ across their faces. Above, Captain Erastes snarled, his vox booming like thunder. "7th Company! Kill that warp-tongued bastard!" Tharn fired, his melta-charge erupting in a white lance. Malchiron's shield flared, warp fire rebounded, and the rooftop became an inferno. Erastes rolled clear as the stone beneath him liquefied, but Tharn's armor melted, his flesh carbonizing in an instant before his weapon detonated. A section of the dome collapsed in molten ruin, boiling 3 cataphractii alive as the slab came down. Bolters thundered, missiles screamed. Astartes of the 7th poured fire into the consul, but the librarians raised a wall of shimmering force, absorbing the storm. Warp lightning flared in return, tearing Iron Hands apart one by one. With each warrior slain, another gem upon the tree flared to life with a ghostly blue glow. The praetor dragged himself from the shattered hololith, vision swimming. He looked on as his men fought and died, their deaths feeding the obscene reliquary. I have failed, he thought bitterly. Malcheron strode toward him, stone blazing in his hand. The praetor lifted his plasma pistol, but it froze to ice in his gauntlet. His blade came next, but it sparked and sagged into molten slag. Malcheron towered over him, triumphant. The Iron Thane will require a suitable leader for his new company of Iron Wraiths. You, praetor, you will lead them. He raised his staff, its tip glowing like a furnace. Then, in a blur of midnight blue, a winged helm streaked down, dagger flashing. The consul staggered back with a snarl, a blade buried in his chest. The ruby stone fell from his hand, clattering to the base of the bone tree. Malcheron howled, ripping the weapon free and unleashing darts of warp light. But dark figures interposed themselves. Atramentar, their shields locking, armor adorned with lightning bolts. Their wall absorbed the psychic barrage with brutal discipline. Talon Centurion Raskarn dragged the stunned praetor into cover behind a fallen pillar. The praetor stared up at the looming helm, disbelief in his voice. You? Raskarn's vox hissed with dry humor. I had planned to kill you, Apollon, but after hearing that warp-tainted fool's sermon, I think the War Master might forgive me a lapse in judgment. The praetor crouched at the shattered pillar, accepting the bolt pistol Raskarn offered. His eyes narrowed as he turned it over. An iron hand sigil still etched into the casing, a gift once exchanged in honor during the crusade. How far they had fallen. Below, the seventh faltered. Librarians advanced inexorably, psychic force flaring as iron hands died screaming, their corpses harvested by Malcheron's will. One by one, the fallen rose again, newborn iron wraiths turning their weapons upon their former brothers. The praetor spat blood and made his choice. All seventh, fall back, suppressing fire. He wished Caden were with him. Without him, the fleet above could offer no salvation. He turned to Raskarn. How many men do you have? Only the Atramentar you see here, the Talon Centurion replied. My ship, Silent Lament, carries more, but my chaplain has not answered Vox. I assume them lost. Then this is what we do, said the praetor. Your Atramentar form the rear guard with Athenorod's cataphractii. We fall back on the landing craft, then Vox the fleet and bring their guns down on this place. Raskarn inclined his helm. He knew well enough that in orbit, his saboteurs would by now be cutting apart the Iron Hand's fleet, and perhaps his own vessel was ash or gone rogue. But there was no point telling the praetor. He gave the order, his Vox a dry hiss. Atramentar, truce for now. We can kill each other later. They moved. The Atramentar storm bolters roared, their shield wall driving the enemy back in disciplined steps. Athenorod and his surviving Terminators fell into place, iron hammers and storm bolts locking the retreat. Behind them, Consul Malcheron smiled as he paced among the dead. His foot struck a ruby stone, sending it rolling to the roots of the bone tree. It flared. The wraithbone sang, golden veins lit red, conduits igniting like arteries. A mind awoke. It was strange at first. A lattice of thought paths branching like veins through crystal, conduits shaped for consciousness. At the terminus of one thread lay a chamber, a cocoon of dust and silence, dormant like an egg awaiting its spark. Then sensation returned, a breath. Valves opened, pumps drew air. Sensory clusters awoke, the brush of wind across plated limbs, the weight of stone falling away. A heart thundered as plasma surged through synthetic veins. A core flared alive, hurling power into nerve bundles of psychoreactive alloy. Fingers flexed. A gauntlet moved. Adorati Leor opened his eyes. Tactical displays burned across his vision, wraithbone systems interfacing through his psychic link as if he had always known them. He drew breath, and a sound like a trumpet blast tore from his throat, a shrill clarion of rebirth. Below, the retreating iron hands scattered as a statue lining the avenue split apart, stone crumbling from an immense form within. "Run, you fool! Run!" Raskarn snarled, dragging one of his Atramentar with him. The praetor's gaze shot upward as he sprinted for the shuttle. "Seventh, withdraw!" he bellowed across all Vox channels. A lance of fire cut down from the clouds, striking the foremost shuttle. It vanished in a miniature sunburst, molten debris raining across the concourse. A colossal footfall followed, crushing an iron hand flat. Others dived for cover as the street quaked beneath the weight. The statue was gone. In its place, a god of war strode into the world. An Eldari battle titan, its frame warped and remade, lenses glowing with Lior's ruby gaze. Its chest shrieked with trumpet song as the machine soul roared, not alien, not daemon, but a man's soul enthroned in a god machine. Consul Malcheron faltered. Even he had not foreseen this. His librarians raised their hands, readying sorcery to contain what they had unleashed. The Titan turned its gaze upon him. "For the War Master," it cried, voice a clarion trumpet that shook the ruins. High above Val Mur, aboard the Lament of Desire, Cadon stood before the command throne of Shipmaster Abutus. Halatrax and Pauloon flanked him like steel shadows, their armor still dusted with the red glow of the planet below. The bridge was hushed. Crew serfs bent over augur consoles, avoiding the sight of Astartes entirely. The air was heavy with the weight of the news Cadon had just delivered. Abutus leaned back in his throne, fingers steepled. His voice was measured, calm, too calm. "So, the Night Lords were stalking us. And what of sabotage?" Centurion Corellin, wearing the blue and gold of the 13th Legion, glanced aside. Nyros was at the Vox pit, half-turned, murmuring to a chapter serf about jet bike engines and skimmer pricing as though the galaxy were not on fire. He caught Corellin's eye and gave a fractional nod before stepping back to his comrade's side. The rest of the bridge crew ignored the Ultramarines with studied discipline. Halatrax shifted, his gauntlet clenching on the rim of his helm. His stare never left Cadon and his 2 lieutenants. "I have already informed the Astartes commanders. Watchers are doubled. Searches for sabotage are underway." Abutus gave a short nod. "Good. Drosvik, send signals to the fleet. Order all ships to maintain assault readiness and break orbit. Head for the system rim." Halatrax and Pauloon exchanged sharp glances. "Why break orbit?" Pauloon demanded. "The Praetor still fights below. We know there's a trap being laid. Should we not commit?" Abutus' eyes flashed, but his voice remained iron steady. "Standard protocol. With saboteurs loose and enemy craft possible in system, dispersal is the only option. Spread the fleet. Make cutting out operations harder. Misfiring macro batteries or reactor implosions cannot cascade if no vessel is near another. The Lament of Desire will hold station. The rest will scatter." Any further protest was cut short by Torquemella at the auger station. Her reedy voice was tight with strain. "Lord Shipmaster, I am detecting an ionization field above the landing zone. It was not present before." Abutus sat upright, eyes narrowing. "What could it mean?" "Some function of the mission, perhaps," Stelvin muttered from his gunnery pit, gaze locked on his auspex. "Or some kind of enemy interdiction field." Torquemella's voice was tight, strained as she bent over her auspex. "That ionization field, it's no storm. It's a type of void shield cast over the Eldari city. We can't read the shield itself, but this level of ionization, it's strong enough to absorb a mining impact." Stelvin in the gunnery pit glanced up from his station, pallid in the lumen glow. "That's not all. I'm picking up weapons discharges on the surface." He paused, eyes widening as the reading scrolled across the cracked display. "But to be detectable from here, it would have to be as powerful as—" He looked up in horror. "There's a god engine down there." Sidon opened his Vox, his voice cold steel. "Shuttle Igneous, report." Silence. "Igneous, respond." There was a burst of static. Then his Vox pack detonated in a violent flare of sparks, hurling him across the deck. Armor slammed against the metal plating as alarms shrieked. Crew serfs screamed, diving from their consoles. Cadon hit the deck hard, the smell of ozone and burning copper filling the bridge. Nyros moved first. He turned his pistol on Fleet Vox Adjutant Davarn Drosvik, who looked up in confusion and shot him clean through the face. Blood misted across the Vox pit. Before the echoes had died, Nyros swung his weapon toward Torquemella. She dived for cover, the round punching instead through one of her aides, killing him instantly. Centurion Corellin raised his bolter. 2 bursts tore through the Iron Hand's Praetorians at point-blank range, their chests bursting apart in a wash of gore. He wheeled, lining up on Shipmaster Abutus. Pauloon threw himself forward, shielding the master in his armor. Bolter shells hammered into his pauldron and power pack, sending sparks shrieking across the bridge. Halatrax answered with a 3-round burst straight into Corellin's helm. The visor detonated. The Centurion's headless body toppled, releasing a live grenade from his hand. The blast lit the bridge with white fire. Cogitators overloaded and blew out in showers of sparks. Servitors shrieked as their linkages died, bodies thrashing in their harnesses. Engineer Anatolis let out a piercing cry, the agony of being severed from the machine spirit echoing across the chamber, cut short by Nairos's bolt pistol. The Luna Wolf advanced through the chaos, helm discarded, a small black box in his hand. He jammed it into a receptacle on the bridge console. Halitrax, half-blinded and dragging the dead weight of his armor, tried to rise. Nairos struck him with his one good arm, hurling the lieutenant to the deck. He aimed his pistol down at him. "You can't stop what's happening below," Nairos said, voice raw but almost sorrowful. "I can't let you try, but know this. I admire your resolve. Even when all is lost, you fight." He never saw Caden rise behind him. The iron hand pulled the energy cell from his ruined Vox pack, jamming it into his armor's supply to jolt his systems back to life. He came up silently, blade in hand. With one hard thrust, he drove it into the base of Nairos's skull. The Luna Wolf dropped, twitching once, blood pooling beneath him. "You always spoke too much," Caden muttered. He pulled Paulun's limp body away from the shipmaster. Abutus gasped, clutching at the wound in his side, then dragged himself upright to the throne. "My thanks," he rasped, before steadying himself to take command once more. Torquemella knelt beside Anatolis, checking his ruined form. "He lives, but barely. We need an apothecary." Stelvin climbed from his gunnery pit, all systems around him blank, servitors hanging slack in their thrones. He shook his head. "Drozvik is dead. Auspex and gunnery are gone." Halitrax staggered upright, armor scorched, back torn open. "What's left? The bridge is useless," Abutus admitted, "but systems can be restored. Until then, we are blind and deaf." Caden tested his Vox, replacing a blasted relay with a spare. The unit crackled, needle twitching. He smiled faintly. "Not deaf," he said, raising the receiver to his ear. After a pause, he looked to the two remaining iron hands. "What troops are aboard the Lament?" "None." Halitrax answered grimly. "This was a Praetor Manipul garrison. The rest of the Legion is heading rimward. And I don't have the range to reach the fleet with this." Caden tapped the Vox. His gaze settled on Abutus. "The Praetor needs us. The shuttles are gone. We need weapons strong enough to bring down a god engine." Halitrax shook his head. "Our heavy ordnance is aboard the Lament of Helrius and the Iron Gauntlet." Paulun, stripped of his broken armor, grimaced. "The armsmen here carry nothing that could scratch a Titan." Abutus sank heavily into his throne. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but I think Brother Ferrisborn has something else in mind." All eyes turned to Caden. He met their stares and gave the faintest of smiles. On the planet below, far below the temple steps, the battle raged. Iron Hand combat squads fought amidst rubble-strewn streets, their bolters hammering against advancing iron wraiths even as the colossal titan strode above them. The Praetor staggered forward, ribs aching from the bone shard embedded in his armor, yet still he moved with iron resolve. At his side, Talon Centurion Raskarn advanced like a predator, Atramentor shields locking behind him as the 7th fell back in disciplined bursts. "7th, with me," the Praetor roared over the Vox, voice jagged with pain yet carrying command. Heavy bolters spat in defiance. Missile launchers thundered. Lascannons cast lances of ruby fire. Each impact gouged wraithbone, each detonation splintered shards from the Titan's hide. The god machine reeled, its plates cracked and burning, and then it turned away. With contemptuous stride, it ignored the gnats buzzing at its ankles. Each footfall crushed avenues into rubble. A clawed swipe toppled a tower, burying a dozen iron hands beneath stone and dust. A lance of incandescent fire burst from its chest, vaporizing a squad in molten armor. Then it advanced, not toward the Astartes, but toward the temple. Raskarn snarled, Vox a predator's growl. "It is not us it fears, it is them." The Praetor followed his gaze. On the high steps stood Consul Malkaran, staff raised, his cabal of librarians arrayed around him. Their robes hung in tatters, their eyes burned with unnatural fire. They advanced together, a wall of psychic fury gathering around their master. The air crackled, warp lightning licked the shattered plaza. The Titan strode forward, each step a quake that shattered the plaza. Its lenses narrowed, wraithbone plates grinding together with shrieks like tortured steel. At its heart, Adarati Lior bellowed through the trumpet Vox. a clarion blast that rattled bone and stone alike. The Wraithclaw swept out in a vast arc. Psychic wards flared as the librarians locked staves into a sigil, their combined strength straining against the force. The blow smashed their barrier, hurling them apart like chaff in a storm. They rose as one, robes torn, eyes burning with warp light. Together they hurled their gathered might. Spears of witchfire lanced into the Titan's chest, bursting wraithbone plates, carving glowing channels into its torso. Leor reeled, systems faltering, static splitting his vision as alarms cascaded through the alien machine mind. He answered with a blast from his trumpet voice, a shattering note of psychic sound. The street itself cracked, rubble was hurled skyward, and wards dissolved into dust. But Leor was no fool. He had once been as they were, a librarian of the Luna Wolves. He knew the shape of their arts, their limits and conceits. That was before the blindness, before the blank welded to his spine. He was still that, but now he was more. He was a wolf still, and a god besides. He did not need to match Psyker to Psyker. He would fight Psyker to God. The Titan leapt, impossibly fast, moving with a dancer's grace that no Imperial engine could ever match. It crossed the plaza in a single bound. A sweep of its arm tore down a spire, sending a hab-block toppling into the ruins below. The librarians threw up wards, erasing chunks of falling wraithbone into the warp. One faltered, distracted by a bolter shot from the iron hands. The falling spire split him in two. His soul detonated outward in an eruption of unreality. Another screamed as his concentration broke, his flesh bulging, mind shredding. A daemon clawed through his collapsing body. The consul cursed and struck him down himself, impaling the half-born creature before it could breach fully into the material realm. The battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat. The surviving librarians turned on him, fury in their eyes. "Malcaron, this is folly. We have what we came for. We should withdraw." Another spat the words. "You have let pride dictate this battle. It was your arrogance that made this Luna Wolf what he is." Malchiron turned. His hand rose lazily, contempt written across his scarred face. He clenched his fist. The speaker's neck broke with a wet crack. His mind ripped into the immaterium where shrieking demons swarmed to feast. The body slumped to the stone. The consul's voice was cold iron. "You two. Any argument?" The survivors bowed their heads, eyes downcast. "Good," Malcaron said, voice low and venomous. "Then we shall finish this." As he spoke, a shadow fell across the plaza. The Titan re-emerged, striding from behind the shattered dome, Iron Hand's bolters flaring against its flanks as they gave warning of its approach. Malcaron planted his staff in the stone, eyes burning. This time he did not intend to give ground. Malcaron sent a fissure running up the wall of a building, shattering bone and crystal as it climbed, then ripped it across the plaza. The rent in reality tore at the Titan's flank, carving a jagged wound through its wraithbone plating. Leor moved aside, and the crack ran on into the next building. Stone and masonry toppled, crushing an Iron Hand position beneath the falling ruin. The Titan advanced. Bolts of energy from the librarians flared against its plates, but the giant danced aside, each stride with a speed and grace no Imperial god machine could match. Malcaron stood his ground, staff raised, while the other two librarians scattered. One sprinted up a shattered pillar, warp flame wreathing one hand, his other warding off Iron Hand bolter fire. With a flick of thought, he drove a squad of iron wraiths toward the Astartes, then hurled a sphere of warped time. The Titan's lance blast froze within it, trapped for a heartbeat before slamming into the pillar. When it struck, the librarian was already gone, only laughter echoing in his wake. He landed on a rooftop, wards blazing, preparing another strike, only for the Titan to stalk him beneath a low bridge. The librarian raised a force wall to deflect the coming lance, but Leor loosed missiles instead. They struck not him but the statue above him. The explosion sent the facade crashing down. He deflected the debris aside, triumphant, until the lance beam followed a heartbeat later, vaporizing him in a storm of white fire. His death scream tore through the warp. His soul bled out in agony, daemons rushing to feast, their laughter echoing across the battlefield. The other two librarians staggered onto the bridge, gazing down at the smoking crater where their comrade had been. One bowed his head. "We are lost," he said, voice hollow. His companion turned in confusion, then froze. The Titan's head rose level with the bridge, ruby lenses burning. They raised their wards in desperation. The bone sword fell like judgment, cleaving through barriers and flesh alike. Their deaths echoed like bells in the immaterium. Their minds were torn apart, shrieking as demonic talons dragged them into eternity. The warp split, their souls shredded and devoured. Malkiron felt them die. He did not mourn. To him their passing was nothing more than fuel. More glory, more power. He walked forward through the smoke, planting each step with deliberate purpose. Ahead, the Titan's silhouette emerged, vast and implacable, shifting at right angles through ruin and shadow. Bolter fire from the iron hands rained past, shells vaporizing inches from his armor. Malkiron raised his staff and called out into the furnace of his mind. "Come then, Lior, I am here." The Titan answered. A foot slammed down between them, shattering the concourse. Malkiron smiled. He flicked his fingers, and the ground beneath the god engine ruptured, collapsing into a pit. It should have worked. In any other battle it would have worked. But the Eldari Titan was no crude Imperial engine. Its hollow projection shimmered, and it did not fall. Malkiron snarled, teeth bared, "Clever wolf." The world darkened. A shadow fell across him. He looked up into the blazing ruby lenses of the Titan as its lance barrel descended, filling his vision with light. The battlefield turned to fire. The vast Titan turned its head toward the landing zone. In Leor's sight, tactical displays bloomed in alien script, clear as runes of war. The Praetor and his men were making their stand there. Good. He sent the signal, and the iron wraiths responded like puppets on a string, their glowing eyes swinging as one. They moved to encircle, hemming in the survivors. None would escape. All would be harvested into his new legion. With strides that shattered the street, the god engine advanced. Elsewhere, a blackened hand clawed at broken stone. Malchiron panted, every breath searing through burned lungs. His post-human frame fought to keep him alive, dragging one ruinous heartbeat after another. He pulled himself up the scalding lip of the crater, flesh blistering where ceramite had fused into him. Ahead, through the smoke, he saw the dome, the ruin, the tree. Salvation. He had felt his companions' screams as they were torn into the warp, but not his own. He would not be devoured. He would endure, not a mere iron wraith. No husk bound in Xeno's machinery. He would walk as Lore had walked. No god engine of chaos, no stolen technology, something greater, a living god, his soul enthroned above even the War Masters, greater than Horus himself. There, a stone, half buried in the roots of the bone tree, gleaming dully through the ash. The pain would be over soon. He crawled forward, armor shards scraping the ground, smoking robes sloughing from his ruined frame. He dragged himself, inch by inch, panting as fingers blistered and stretched. Closer, almost there. The gem was within reach. His hand closed, trembling, around its surface. The stone shattered beneath a descending weight. A boot, scorched and pitted, stamped it into the dirt. The stone shattered as the heavy boot ground it into the dirt. Malkiron froze. Slowly he raised his head with his one good eye, staring upward in horror. Captain Erastus Carrion stood over him, black ceramite streaked with ash, bolter leveled. "Tharn and Madrax were good men, warp-tongue," he said coldly. Then the gun barked. Malkiron screamed, "No!" His eyes flew open, not smoke and ruin now, but sea and surf. Fine sand beneath his fingers, salt water washing over his skin, cool against burns that no longer existed. He rose to his knees, unscarred, the air thick with perfume. Before him lay a blade, silver pink and shimmering, beautiful beyond words. "You have the right idea," a voice said. He turned. A tall, statuesque form stood behind him, woman-shaped, crowned in horns, hooves sunk in the surf. Jewels draped her like raindrops, and her smile was knives behind silk. Around her capered mocking shapes, demonettes with claws for hands, giggling in chorus. Where?" Malkiron stammered, though in his soul he already knew. Cenarion tilted her head. "I have a gift to make, a little trinket, but such things require assistance." He reached for a pistol that was not there. His gaze flicked to the sword in the sand. "You will never have my soul, Damon." He seized the weapon. The sand split, a clawed hand shooting up to seize his wrist, binding it to the hilt. His flesh cracked, armor fused into insectile plates that crawled and reshaped across his arm. The blade melted into him, fusing with his veins, burning into his marrow. He thrashed, screaming, as daemonettes closed in and held him fast, laughing while his cries turned to a song of pain. Cenarion ignored his howls. She stood calm in the surf, waves lapping her hooves. Hush, eternity is long, and bliss longer still. Your service to me has only begun. The screams dragged on, then silence, only the hiss of surf. When at last the daemonette scattered, a sword lay in the shallows, rust-pitted, jagged, broken-looking, and yet, beneath the corrosion, she saw the beauty. She smiled, lifting it delicately. "Yes," she whispered, "a fitting gift for my champion." She wrapped it in cloth and passed it to her servants. "Now, let us go and find him." Back in reality, Raskarn hacked down an iron wraith that lunged at him, its face still half the man it had been. A storm bolter hammered at him, then jammed. The shape of Madrax, no, what had been Madrax, loomed, eyes glowing, gem burning in his chest. The wraith's blade came down, caught in a clawed power fist. The praetor wrenched it free, emptied his bolter into the husk that had once been his brother, then tossed the corrupted weapon aside, extending a hand. Raskarn laughed harshly as he took it. "That makes us even, eh, Apollon?" "I never acknowledged the debt," the praetor growled, hauling him upright. They ran together, Iron Hands and Atramentar alike, falling back to the line. The conversions were worse than death. The Iron Hands watched in horror as their brothers were remade before their eyes, gems crushed into their chests, the light spreading like veins beneath the skin. Armor cracked and split as bone circuits thrust through flesh, plating fusing into augmetic scaffolds. Their screams became static shrieks as voices bled into vox grills that had never been there before. Storm bolter fire punched holes through them, but they rose again, twitching, wires threading veins, eyes glowing with false light. They stood, dead men walking, weapons turning against their brothers. Athenorod bellowed from the trenches, his cataphractii hammering fire into the tide. "We are not in a favorable position." The praetor and Raskarn slammed down into cover beside him, the burning shuttle looming behind. "If it weren't for that god engine," the praetor began, Raskarn cut him off. Watching one of his own Atramentar being converted, the gem cracking into his chest even as he crushed an iron hand beneath him. "It's a numbers game, cousin. Night Lord doctrine. Break, scatter, bleed them with ambushes." The praetor shook his head, helm lenses burning red. "Iron Hand doctrine. We stand. We dig in. We make every shot count more than the enemy's." The iron wraiths came in a tide of glowing eyes and broken bodies. Bolters barked. Stormfire tore through armor and flesh, but still they advanced, veins glowing with alien circuitry, armor splitting to accept bone circuit grafts as their screams turned to vox screeches. Athenorod roared over the vox, his cataphractii fighting shoulder to shoulder with Atramentar. "Hold the line!" The defenders fell back, step by bloodied step, firing into the horde. Praetor Apollon and Raskarn fought side by side, blades and bolters cutting down what had once been their brothers, climbing through ruin and dust until they reached the crest of a shattered statue. From there they looked out over the plaza and saw doom. The Titan approached. It strode into view like a god of ruin, each step flattening streets, its bone sword dripping rubble. Missiles arced upward to smash against its hull, melta-blasts hissed against its hide. Nothing slowed it. It raised its head, lenses burning. The trumpet vox bellowed, a clarion of victory that shook the very stone. Adhurati Leor's voice rang out, triumphant. The defenders faltered. For a heartbeat, all seemed lost. Then the vox cracked to life. "Take cover," Caden's voice. The ground shook, not from the Titan, but from something greater. A thunderous roar split the air as the shadow of a warship fell across the plaza. The lament of desire tore through the city like an avenging spear. Its armored prow, wreathed in flame and wreckage, smashed through towers and temples, screaming a path of destruction. With unstoppable momentum it rammed the Titan, shattering its wraithbone chest in a detonation of light and fire. The god engine staggered, broke, and fell, its clarion silenced in a thunderous collapse. The lament of desire did not stop. Engines howling, hull aflame, it pulled free of the ruins, gouging a canyon through the city as it clawed skyward. With a roar like judgment, the battleship tore back into the heavens. Silence hung for a moment over the battlefield, broken only by the hiss of fires and the groans of wounded Astartes. Then the sky split again. Drop pods thundered down, slamming into the broken plaza, hatches blowing open. Reinforcements poured forth into the smoke. The last survivors, black and midnight blue, looked up through cracked helms as salvation arrived amidst fire. The reserves fanned out, bolters roaring, hunting the iron wraiths in disciplined packs. Lines of fire crisscrossed the ruins, each volley tearing apart the broken husks. Piece by piece, the mockeries of brothers were cut down, until silence fell at last across the shattered plaza. Smoke drifted. The few surviving cataphracti stood amidst Atramentar, armor cracked and scorched, weapons held ready, but not raised. Talon Centurion Raskarn looked down at his sword and bolt pistol, both heavy with blood, then across to the praetor. "So," he said, voice harsh through his vox, "I suppose we kill each other now." The praetor glanced at the plasma pistol in his hand, a weapon marked with bat wings and the numerals of the Night Lords. He shifted his weight, pain flashing as the bone shard in his leg ground against sealant foam. "I would," he rasped, "but I have a bad leg." There was a heartbeat of silence. Then Raskarn barked laughter, holstering his weapon. Some of his Atramentar chuckled with him. Among the iron hands, grim smiles broke across scarred faces. A few hands clasped in mutual respect, others stood apart, uncertain. The praetor looked skyward. The contrails of the Lament of Desire still scarred the heavens, and fresh landing craft were descending in fire. "We can drop you at the rim," he said at last. "You'll find your way back to separatist lines." Raskarn nodded. "Your bolters would serve the War Master better. Your men have more honor in them than all who kneel to the goblin on his golden throne." He raised his new blade in salute toward the iron hands. The praetor turned, his gaze passing over the survivors. Cadon Ferrisborn supporting Erastes Carrion, armor scorched and blackened. Athanorod, Halatrax, and Paulun standing together. The last of the Concord in darkness. Each met his eyes, each gave a slow nod. He placed a hand on Raskarn's bullet-riddled pauldron. "Not yet, cousin. My men and I have a score to settle with the Iron Thane and his glorious 14th Company." Raskarn laughed again, low and cruel. "Then in the meantime, best our legions avoid crossing blades, but I know a son of the Phoenician who may be of use to you." The praetor's eyes met Cadon's. Both men nodded once, wordless. The seventh had chosen. They were doomed to heresy.